Hi, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. I'm absolutely delighted to be here and more than anything, to be working with my colleague, Jen Jones, who I'll let herself introduce where she is in the company and what she does. So, Jen, over to you.
Hi guys, I'm Jen. I'm based in Montreal and I've been working with Jolly for 2 years now. Can you believe that, Yvonne? I can't believe that. I was a former teacher myself, and now my role here is helping to make our digital products work well for our teachers. So I do a lot of research and designing. And on that note, we have a super exciting big update coming later today in Jolly Classroom. So you should see a big change, especially around our assessments. And I've created a lot of training videos to support you. So hopefully that helps you make you understand how to use assessments and also some bits about interventions, how you can interpret the data and what you can do with the data to help your pupils with phonics. And if you ever have any ideas of videos you'd like in the future, just reach out to me at jen@jollylearning.co.uk.
Mm. And this is valuable because during the session, we'll be looking at how assessments really do fill the gaps. And more than anything, Jen has done an amazing job in being able to help with your planning and also the trajectory of children's learning of phonics. Because if we identify the gaps really early, then we know we can move forward with that. So, Jen, I'm going to get started with the webinar, and this is always the scary moment for me to make sure that the sharing works well because the last time we did have a few issues. So
Yes.
coming up on the screen now, what we should be looking at is my presentation.
Yeah.
Can you see that nicely?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay. And one of the things we did was in the last session that we had was looking at the foundation stage. And, Jen, we know that children really love doing the songs and the chants and the 42 sounds, but often that is probably the most engaging part and the part that children get quite easily and quite multisensory with the kinesthetic approach. So, it's one of those ones we know is very successful. Building on that, that's where we need to take everything that has come from what they've been doing so that they're starting their reading and writing journey. So,
Mhm.
everybody, welcome. And it's great to know that you're joining us for our sessions. And as Jen said, please, any feedback, anything you want to share with us, please do so. And we'll be keeping a look on the chat box as we go along. So, what's in the session? We're going to have a look at the pace of the program. And I think, as Jen has said, with the assessments, we've paced the assessments out really well to support this, haven't we, Jen?
Yeah, and actually, one of the changes that we have is in our writing assessment. It used to be that you could only do the writing assessment um, at the six set points in the program. And now what we've changed is that they match what you can do with the reading. So, for example, if you take step one in reading, you could always decide to just assess on one group at a time. You could, of course, do groups 1 to 3 in a set if you're ready for that, but you could also select just group one. And now you can match that with the writing assessment. So that way you can decide we've taught group 1 and 2. I'm ready to assess, do the assessment for reading, then do the assessment for writing.
Yeah, so this is a big help. And Jen has uploaded a lot of videos to support you through the assessment and how to onboard and everything. But we'll be talking about this as we go along. We're also going to briefly look at what's covered in step one, because this is the foundation that moves on to the next stage. And we've got to make sure everything is in place for that. And also what the key points are in step two. Now, we haven't gone through every single page because we just don't have the time. But there are some key learning points within step two that are important. You will see them repeated in a different format, but a similar kind of content, and also the desired outcomes. Where do we want the children to be? But as we know, Jolly Phonics is a fast-paced program, but that doesn't mean that we're going so quickly that the children haven't got time to be able to revise and practice all the sounds that they have. And this is the beauty of having the resources that they can do so, and also Jolly Classroom. And it is very flexible and easy. And I talk to a lot of teachers who say, you know what, just before Christmas, the break, the winter break, we have children off sick, so we can slow down and then we can accelerate when children are really on that point and they understand. You have your lesson plans. Not only are they in the teacher notes in Jolly Classroom, but we have our fabulous teacher book as well. And for some of you, you might remember the old handbook. They still are valid and they have a lot of information. But the most important thing, it's been developed by teachers for teachers. So we are very aware of what happens in the classroom. And also, more than anything, from information that you give us, we understand the changes and the trends in education. And that's really important, isn't it, Jen?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the cornerstone of all the steps that we take in step one, two, and three are the five key skills. The five key, I'll start that one again. The five key skills are present in every lesson that we do, but you might find at the very beginning, like with the first two sounds, blending and segmenting isn't there as much as in the other lessons. The introduction of tricky words that comes in group six, but also you will notice that letter formation is all the way through, be it air letters, palm letters, or the letter formation in Jolly Classroom. What we do know is we're reinforcing how children are assimilating what they hear and what they see, and also that finger tracking, we're embedding that so children are ready for when they move on to writing. But also there's other multisensory ways of doing this, such as using the magnetic letters, feeling those, sand trays, and we endorse that children have a mixture because when children are so young, all of this that are in the key skills appeals to all our children who have different ways of learning. Also, through all of this, we are looking at how children are using their blending and segmenting skills, which should now be really in place as we move on with step two. Briefly, in step one, what do we cover? Well, the 42 sounds now you're probably very familiar with within the program. You also recognize that we have our points for assessments, which are after group three and then after group seven. That's correct, isn't it, Jen?
That's correct. But remember now you can assess at the end of each group. And when you get into step two, it's slightly different, but I'll mention it when you get to that point.
Yeah. And that's good that we can do that because there may be some children who need to have the additional assessment because what Sue Lloyd has identified is that by the end of group three, you can usually recognize children who may need revision and also may not be getting it all. So this is what the great thing is about having this diversity of how we teach in that we have the sounds, the actions, the stories, the chants, that every child is able to interact with that letter sound and that letter shape. Of course, when we get to group four, it's slightly different that we have two letters making one sound. And if you make sure that the children have got the first three groups really well learned, they should be able to move on without any difficulty. But of course, it's a new concept. But the way that we introduce the lessons and help children on board the diagraphs, we have the vowel diagraphs and the consonant diagraphs. If you follow the program correctly, you should not have a problem. So we have all of our information here about the 42 sounds that we begin with. But then if you look at how our lessons progress, we do have a lot embedded in that. And the one thing I would say is with Jolly Classroom, you have everything prepared for you. So it's an easy thing to use if you only have a short period of time. I, of course, love the paper resources as well. And what I have found is using both can often address that diversity of learning as well. It can also keep your teaching fresh when children are seeing you use the paper resources like the flashcards and also using the digital resources. But as you can see here, one of the things that we are really looking at are the skills the children are developing, the strategies you are helping them to develop. Things like blending and segmenting, that's a life skill. If you go to a country where it's a different language and you're looking at a menu, for example, you are decoding that. You are blending and segmenting to get the word out. And we often forget that, don't we, Jen? That it's a skill we
Yeah.
still use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
hmm
And also moving on to progression. And I've popped multi-sensory activities down the bottom there because you may find that you might not have as much time to do as much as you were doing before because our lessons are getting bigger. But the delivery of each lesson does have a multi-sensory approach.
Mhm.
As mentioned, we endorse using the teacher's book, not only from the point of view that it gives you an overarching view of the whole program, you have a really good introduction if you're not that familiar with the program, but also what it does do is let you know where your finishing point is after every pupil's book. And this is quite important for transition. And you want to make sure that when they finish pupil book one, that they've got to the point where they can do adequately everything in those lessons before moving on. Again, this ties in with assessment. But also from your planning point of view, if you're in a school and you need to put in your planning, you can see how the progression works using the scope and sequence. This is a brilliant way to know where your desired outcomes are going to be after the first year or the third step that you're using the program. So it's a good tool, teacher's toolkit resource to have. And what resources do I need to get started? Well, if you've done step one, you've probably got the teacher's book or the phonics handbook. You may have Jolly Classroom, but certainly moving forward, you need the pupils book too. And there are other things like the flashcards. You have your box of flashcards, which you can organize, your illustrated flashcards, and also your decodable readers. Remember, it's really important that children are reading. So very, very briefly, if we look at book one, you can see the format is quite repetitive. Children now know what is expected of them as they do the lessons, the same as in Jolly Classroom. So in book one, we're looking at the 42 main letter sounds, their letter formation, blending CVC words and moving on with that skill, but also the introduction of the tricky words. Now, the introduction of the tricky words means that we're starting our decodable readers. Children will also be doing some form of dictation. I can't emphasize enough how important dictation is. And
Mhm.
once we have completed the first book, or as we look here, we're going through Jolly Classroom, you will see that before we move on, it is absolutely fundamental that you have some idea of where your children are, not only for their letters and sounds and things, but other skills as well, Jen. What other skills would you highlight here?
Well, I think it's also really important to see that they're forming the sound correctly with their mouth because some children do find sounds like the sh and the th, they find or the f. They're very subtle, especially if you're not coming from an English background. Those kind of differences is really important. So when you're doing assessments, for reading anyways, you're one-to-one. So you have that opportunity to really hear if they're pronouncing it correctly. Whereas when they're in the class, they can kind of hide a little bit and just say it with the rest of the group, and you can't tell whether they're saying it correctly or not.
No. And we have a question where somebody has asked, what if I skip doing the assessments after the three letter groups? Can I just go straight to the last group? What would you recommend?
I mean, you assessments are meant to be there to guide you and to help you. And I think every school situation is going to do it differently. So it's flexible to meet your needs. Some teachers really, the reason we decided to do it per group was because of feedback from teachers saying that they don't want to do this long chunk at once. Because if you wait till the end of group 1 to 3, it will take longer to do per child. And also, some people might feel that they'd like to intervene earlier on. So they want to do it quickly and they get in that routine at the end of each group, they do it. But yes, you can skip it. You can move forward. You could do an assessment for the first 4 groups all at once if you want. It's designed to be flexible to meet your needs. Because also some schools they have assessment weeks. So
Mhm.
they have a designated in the calendar, this week is when we do assessments, and it's a school-wide rule. So therefore, when you get to that point, you can assess on what you've taught. So if you've taught up to group 4, then you would assess on group 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah. I think the most important thing, as Jen has said, is decide how you're going to do this. Because if you're going to assess every single child in your class, at the end of 42 sounds, it could take a long time. So it's
Yeah.
understanding what fits in with your timetabling. So
Yeah.
you
And
can
also,
see,
some children can't sit for that long to be that
no,
focused, you know?
no. And I think also it's dependent on your unique teaching environment and how you want to do this. But the recommendations that we have is what is the core of the assessment pack and how to use it. So
Yeah.
keep on top of that and have a look.
Yeah. And the recommended time is those 6 points throughout the program. But within those 6 points, we've broken them up into smaller sub-assessments so that if you haven't taught everything in that main assessment, but you still want to assess, you can assess them on a smaller amount to see how they're getting on.
Yeah. And this is all good advice. And the program has been built on what you have been telling us. So
Mm-hmm.
it's extremely helpful. Now,
Yeah, a lot
before
of our
we
SEN teachers were saying as well that they need to be able to assess their children on smaller chunks and repeatedly so that they can show that growth over time. So a child might do one group over 3 months, but they need to assess them more than just once to see that progress. So we have made those changes because of those comments from you guys.
And that makes sense, to be honest.
Yeah.
So before we move on to step two, one thing I say to teachers is check your knowledge. Check that you understand what is being asked of you within step two, because in Jolly Classroom, it's a slightly different format in that we are now presenting, 5 lessons for that week. And also you do have the teacher's book to refer back to. Have a good look around Jolly Classroom if you're not familiar with how the lessons are distributed and exactly your timing, because for some schools, they may only have 3 lessons of English a week, and sometimes they may only have 25 minutes. So, how are
Mm.
you fitting all of these in? And planning your lessons, we recommend you don't skip over things that are core teaching, but there may be some things that your children are okay with, such as handwriting, but then you may have children who still need that reinforcement. How much time do you spend on it? And as Jen said, with regular assessment, what we can do is look at what we can build in to the lesson, and also, oh, excuse me, how can we help those children who need help? Excuse me. So another important thing is fidelity to the resources. If you are going to use other resources. They may not match the groups of sounds that we have and also the pace of teaching. So be mindful of that. And also how we are building and establishing children's foundational knowledge before they move on to Jolly Literacy. So there is a reason that we have a roadmap and the authors have built the resources to match the core program so that the children are having the right information at the right time to support the level that they're at. So that is quite important. So we're finally at step two, book two, and you can see we've got quite a lot going on here. We're introducing the alternatives. We're continuing with handwriting, although it's a little bit more structured. The introduction of more tricky words. And I can't validate enough how important it is to have the tricky words up where the children can see them, because although we're helping the children find the tricky parts, they also need to see these words to help with the spellings. And we're moving on to words and sentences where we're helping children to have a form of guided writing. And let's have a look at this lovely little video. It looks super, doesn't it, Jem? And you look at all the pages like that together, you can see how bright and lovely they are. And also, when we go into Jolly Classroom, we can see the layout. So these are designed so that you can do some each day. But what you will find is the number 5 here is slightly shorter. That is your consolidation. And you can see that they're numbered 1 to 5 so that you are following a process. As I said, don't try and mix them up. The value of one lesson impacts on the next one that comes along. And what you'll see is that we're doing a lot of handwriting as we go through. Some of the handwriting is very valuable for teachers who have younger children, but I really recognize that if you have older children, they may be fully equipped to do capital letters and with the structure of letters. So maybe you don't need to spend so much time on this part. I think we're realistic, aren't we, Jen, with the information we've had about handwriting?
Yeah, I think there's been some questions about this layout, a little bit of confusion. So the units are a week, and the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is meant to be your Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday kind of thing. But like you mentioned earlier, Yvonne, that we do have some schools who are only able to teach it 3 days a week because they are teaching in another language. So there is that flexibility. And like you said, the handwriting, maybe that lesson could be combined with, say, tricky words, for example. Or, you've got that fifth day, which, as you mentioned, is a lot shorter. It's more revision and consolidation. So you can kind of be a little bit more flexible with how you approach it. This is just a guidance.
Yeah, and that goes back to the comment about know what is expected from you as the teacher about the program. Know, have a look at what each lesson is asking you to do, because if you have time constraints, if you are finding it challenging fitting 5 days into one, because you might think I have to change my planning time. If this step is a whole term and my term is quite short, what do I need to look at? But remember, we can't not do the core essential one, which would be here, we're looking at the alternatives. And what I would say is that if you have done step one, children should migrate to this quite easily. And if they've done step two, as we'll do in the next webinar, you'll see how they should move on to more challenging concepts. But it's a case of pace and finding your pace. Now we're going to go straight into the first page that we have with book two. And isn't this a challenging concept? Because what we're asking the children to do is to go right back to that original sound that they've learned, which is the y. And the y is at the beginning of the word. So when you think about it, we need to pull that information forward. The children are current with this information because if you've been doing the revision using Jolly Classroom with the flashcards, with blending, they're always going to be revising the 42 sounds in a combination either with flashcards or with the blending and segmenting activities. So now we're bringing in a new concept, which is the y sound is going to be the e sound. So,
Mhm.
well, how would I tackle this? First thing I would do is look at the words that I've done before. I'd bring the children back to that first teaching point, which is the yogurt, yogurt. I'd get them to do the action, do the sound, reinforce that, and even go through some words like yam and yak and yes and yellow, words that we have probably done before. And I'm going to say to them, do you know what? I'm going to tell you how that y, when it is at the end of a word, has a different sound. And that sound is the E that we've done before, like in E or. So we're showing children how, and they're well familiar with this. A lot of children, Jen, are familiar with mummy, daddy,
Yeah, I was gonna
baby.
say because I hear mommy and daddy all the time, and I remember that's how I approached it with my children was that those are words that they say all the time.
Yeah. So if we exhibit those, and you can see that on the first page here, we are looking at these. And of course, we have the double consonants. What strategies are you bringing for that? Are you doing the arm blending? So they're tapping, are they holding up the fingers? And of course, we've got to be careful that although it's the E sound, it's not the same as the double E that we have for that action. So they're beginning to understand that we have alternative sounds. We have alternative sounds and alternative spellings. So this is an easy one because if we look at Jolly Classroom, isn't that wonderful? It actually shows us, it gives us the action, it gives us the sound that it sounds like that we've already learned. Also gives me the graphic, the picture of the yogurt, so I'm remembering that. And this yummy is great because I've got the y at the beginning and I've got the e sound. What a perfect word this is to exemplify how we are changing that grapheme sound into the long E sound, yummy. And I wouldn't just go over this word, I'd put it in a context. I'd ask the children to give me a sentence. So, Jen, give me a sentence with yummy.
Oh, I love yummy yogurt.
Ah, there you go. So that was a good one because Jenna's brought us back to the original concept of the yogurt and also the yummy part. Now, someone has mentioned about how the y sometimes is pronounced as a j. Yes, this is possible. I know that in Spain
Mm,
it's a jello and yes. This is a
hmm
good way to practice as well with pronunciation. And we do have the sounds that are on our website so that you can listen and reinforce. But also, because these have sound buttons, get children to listen and practice because then what they're saying will transpose to writing. And if they're pronouncing it as a j, like jummy or jess or jello, it's going to be the j sound, the j sound they're going to put. So we have
hmm
further examples for children to work with, and I'm going to overemphasize funny, sleepy. I'm going to overemphasize that end sound, the one that they're hearing right at the end, so that they're getting the pattern of where this goes. And generally, I wouldn't say for everything, but generally, when that Y is on the end, it is the E sound. However, we've got to be mindful that you might have a child who say, well, what about the word fly? And that
Mm,
is a different sound altogether. And what we want to do is get this one concrete. They learn this because then later on, when we
hmm
know that that Y has the Y and the E, and it also can have an I sound like in fly and sky. We're not ready for that yet. I'm not going to talk
hmm
about that yet. We're just going to focus on this. And another good thing is using the teacher's book. It helps you understand and also gives you all the tips you need for teaching this. The
hmm
one thing is practice. Now, that's just one lesson. So you might want to go back and revise that. But remember, all your revision is built in. So as you are doing the next lesson, the Y sound and the E sound will be built into Jolly Classroom and also your flashcards so that you are revising it. But the one thing is get children to put these words in a sentence so they have a context. And if you're doing your dictation, they should be practicing not only the sounds. With dictation, it's letter formation, it's blending, it's segmenting, it's fluency. We're building up all these skills. And that brings me nicely on to handwriting. So, as Jen mentioned, it depends how it fits in your class. And for some people, like there's a message saying that they have capital letters in some countries come first. And that is very true. We're aware, aren't we, Jen, that in some
hmm
countries these come before the lowercase.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that can be a little bit tricky. But what we do know is that either or, when we have handwriting, you can see that on this page, we're looking at the small letters and the capital letters or the big letters. Some of them transpose really well, but there's some that change completely. So if we have been teaching a child like this is the grapheme, this is the letter shape, and this is the sound, we've now got to reteach saying this is the sound and the shape has changed. Now, children are a little bit more aware of their name, environmental print. They will have seen capital letters. They identify them in like stop and McDonald's, and they'll see them all around. So it's not a huge leap. The huge leap is the letter formation. And also, what we are looking at is good grip with the fingers, froggy grip. Without having a really good grip, children end up having muscle fatigue in their hand, and also letter formation can be a problem. We need children to be able to form their letters well because if they can't read it, they can't say it. And if the teacher can't read it, she can't evaluate it.
And I think also if you don't address that early on, you cannot break it later because once a child is 9, 10, 11, I've taught children at that age, and if they've got the wrong grip and also the wrong direction of creating the letter, so instead of doing the A going anti-clockwise, they go the other way around, and you can't change it at that point. So it's so important at this age to really watch them address those issues and reinforce it early on so that we don't reinforce bad habits.
Yeah, and that's very, very true. And I think more than anything is it stops the creative flow. It's a bit like reading as well as decoding. If a child has to think about how do I do that letter, that's where all the energy and the focus is going to be. So in some ways, having the letter formation still trickling through step two is good for those children who still need that reinforcement. But you may have other children who are flying through their handwriting.
Hmm. Hmm.
But this is something that we know from research is having to think about a letter shape while you're trying to write slows everything down. And
Yeah.
it can be frustrating for a child. So this is from Jolly Classroom. As we can see, you have the direction. And also, as I was mentioning, and Jen has reinforced the starting point so children know. So we're going from curves to straights here. And this is why sometimes curriculums start with capital letters because it's sometimes easier for children to do straight
Mm.
lines before it is to do curves. But what we do know is that children do accommodate both of these at some point. It's just practice. And if you are in a class where you have time constraints, do remember when is your children going to practice doing their handwriting? When are they going to pick up a pencil? When are they going to pick up a pen for the whiteboard and practice that letter formation? Because that cognitive hand-to-eye coordination of how a letter is formed is all built in. How am I doing this in any language, in any symbol? And it stays. And the one thing I would say, especially if children are having reversal issues with the b and the d, you need to keep giving practice so that they can see the starting point and then coming down. So
And also just adding in about dictation, because I know a lot of people have commented in the past that they skip it because they don't have time.
mm,
And I know the value of it. And I would just add in that dictation doesn't have to be a long sentence. It can also just be letters, it can be words, it can be quick. And the idea is that it's just 2 minutes, could be up to five if you have it. It's kind of a nice way to close the lesson. It's just recapping and it's giving them that automaticity of like writing without having to think about every single letter. And of course, early on, it will just be letters, but then eventually we build it into words and then sentences.
yeah. And I think this is also when you were starting, even with the first few groups, there are CVC words that can be practiced
Mhm.
in many ways, sand trays, pulling down the letters and then progressing on to writing. But you will find in the little word book and the word bank, and also in the teacher's book, words that can be used for dictation. Just be
Mhm.
mindful if you're going to make up your own, that the
Mm.
children are only doing the words that contain letters they've learned and the tricky words, but it's hugely important. And if we look here, we're going on to our tricky words, and you can see we have you and your. And this gives the opportunity for imprinting where the children are practicing the letter formation. Depends if you're using precursive or print, but the fact that children are writing this down, they remember the sequence. They're tracing and then they have a go by themselves. And you can model these words in a sentence because if children are just looking at the words, they need to have a context and you're offering them a grammatical structure to have that word in, which will remember, you have a lovely pink dress. Where is your pencil? Model so they can hear. It's a bit like prepositions. If you're just going to learn them without putting them in a sentence, they may not have any context at all. And then we're
Mhm.
moving on to the words and sentences, which really start in a guided way. You talk about the picture. We're also going to think about what words. And if you look at the title, The Hen, we have something I'd say to the children. Can you find the tricky word? How many sounds in hen? Can you do the action for the eh? Can you do the action for the huh? I'd get them unpredictable questions, get them using their knowledge before we move on. But I can show you a better example of this on Jolly Classroom where we have really bright image. And we talk about the picture, we can use the spyglass and zoom in to focus on certain things because there's a lot going on there. You can ask the children to talk about what they can see. But we also have really good modeling because the tabs on the side are going to say, I can see a. And especially for children who have English as a second language, they are hearing the structure that they can use, and we can change what they can see. I might zoom into the chick and say, what can you see? I can see a chick. That's it. That's a boring sentence. Can we make it a little bit more exciting? I can see a yellow chick. I can see a small chick. I might even scribe, I can see a chick. And is that a decodable sentence, Jen? I
I
can see a
can
chick.
see a chick. Yeah,
Yeah, that's a
yeah,
decodable sentence.
yeah.
So if I scribe it, or because I have time limitations, I can half scribe it and get the child to finish it off. Think about all these ways that you're still involving the children to get them to talk about the picture. Now, this usually takes longer than one lesson, but the fact that children
Mhm.
are talking about it means that they'll be able to write about it. There's nothing
But
worse
also, if I
than,
could add in,
yeah,
Yvonne, we've got that fifth day that's revision,
yeah.
and it comes after this lesson. And on that fifth day, it's quite a short lesson because it's just revision, right? And so, if you had a class that was really enjoying this and they wanted to do a bit more, you could do a bit more on that fifth day because being able to communicate orally about what you see is a really important skill that I know a lot of children need to do more of. They're not talking about things as much, because of everything online. They're just passively watching things. So to orally speak about something is another skill that's important. And then, of course, if the children are coming up with creative sentences that have words that are not decodable, as a teacher, you can write those words up as a word bank so that they can still write these interesting creative sentences, with some help.
Mm. And we have that activity here where we can write
Hmm.
words. And it's a good opportunity to, when I used to do something like this, where we had the glossary of words, it's powerful to scribe the words, even if they're not decodable ones. But children
Yeah,
are really
yeah,
excited if they've said something like scruffy and you've put,
yeah,
you know,
yeah. What a
but
great
what,
word. You want to encourage that, don't you?
yeah, and it's true, they really are
Yeah.
excited.
And you
But
can also take those opportunities and go, oh, scruffy, oh, scruff E, and emphasize that ending and reinforce, like, I'll help you with the first part, but what do you think that E is going to be at the end of the word? Bringing back that other lesson, those great opportunities to do that.
yeah, and I think more than anything is using every opportunity. There may be words on there like egg, and let's have a look. We've got spider. How many words do you want to use that you can say, okay, who can tell me how many sounds in this word? Put the sound dots. Can you do the sound? Just picking out little things that are bringing children back to that original teaching point. So you're still evaluating and you're still assessing. But if you
Mhm.
look at the activity, how do I start? We started about talking about it. We've engaged children. We've got their interest there. They're speaking. And for the first couple of times, you may need to scribe. We start off with a dictation sentence. You might find that challenging in that lesson, but you can move it on, as Jen said, to another one. But also your planning. What can you fit into your 20, 25 minutes? And what are your desired outcomes? Do you want to hear the children use their verbal skills and then move on to perhaps going to have like one sentence? So how much can you fit into your time? But the great thing about this is that you have dictation sentences built in. Even if you can only do two out of the three, even if you can
Mhm.
only get 10 words up and the children are using those in conversation, you are starting the creative writing process. And children will follow the other guided writing that you're doing because we've done this. They'll recognize that there is a pattern. And it does get easier, doesn't it, Jen?
Hmm. I think it's also about establishing those routines because we want to encourage children to sound out the words so that they can independently write words. And even if they can't spell it correctly, at this point, it doesn't matter. As long as they're using their phonetic skills and able to get some of the sounds, that's what we want. And that's what we want to encourage. We don't want them to think, oh, that word is too hard, so I'm going to change it to an easier word that I know how to spell. We want to encourage them to be creative and really stretch their abilities.
Yeah, and it is important also, as we can see here on this page, we have further activities using the tricky words, and also how can the children do this? So you've got the ow sound, d ow, and what are you bringing the child back to, the sounds that they can hear and the opportunities to use these in writing. You're probably
Mhm.
thinking, God, Jen and Yvonne are asking me to do an awful lot. But the thing is once you know the program really well, you've invested a bit of time to look at what the activities are asking you, you can make them really fun and engaging. Because learning letter sounds is not the most stimulating things, but what you can do with those letter sounds are really stimulating. And more so when we move on to things like looking at the short vowels, the children will have learned these now. They know this is a, e, or a. They know the short vowels. And you can see a little vowel hand there where children have that in class. You may have made them for the children, but also we're using a resource that we have, which is our hands. But before we can move on to the long vowels, I want to make really sure that those children understand the short vowels well enough. And what you can see here is a little activity. But one of the challenges, if you are teaching English as a second language, is do they have the vocabulary for this, Jen? And this is where we might
Mm-hmm.
say, okay, I'm only going to do 4 out of this page and focus on using the visual cues to help the children understand. They may know these in their own language, but how can I reinforce the vocabulary acquisition and also that they're hearing the short vowel sounds? And so this is really important that you spend a little bit of time revising these. Also, going back to those CVC words where you had something like sat and pen and nip and pot and put,
Mm-hmm.
where they're looking and hearing those sounds. They're doing them on their fingers, they're tapping them before we move on to the activity. But the one great thing is in Jolly Classroom, we have lots of activities for reinforcement, and that's very audio visual because vowels are what you hear, Jen, and they're not all the same in every accent, are they?
Mhm. No, they're not. And that is tricky. That is another whole layer of complexity,
Yeah.
So yeah.
And we don't want children to have to change their accent for where they are to do the vowels, but we do want them to listen to you as a teacher modeling, but choose the right grapheme so that when they are doing the word like pen, they're not hearing pin. We want to make sure that even if there is an
Mhm.
accent, they are hearing the right vowel. They're getting the right grapheme to show. So there's lots of activities using the hand and also the ways that children are dictating, they will understand that that letter fits with that word. And these can also be used for IEPs. These activities, when you go into Jolly Classroom, I think it's on the right-hand side of the activities, aren't they, Jen, where they're bunched together in ability in game.
Yes, but actually, we are making a big update for that, which should be ready. I don't exactly know when, but soon, that will make it even more powerful. So that the idea being you can find an activity and you can put in where you're at in the program so that the activity will only ask questions based on the sounds that you already know. And that will be really powerful so that you can go in and reinforce and know for sure that it's only addressing words or sounds that you've already been taught.
Yeah, and there is a question saying, my students are still confusing their vowels. Well, you need to just go back and keep practicing with short CVZ words because
Yeah.
if you're not getting the short vowel sounds right before you move on to the long vowel sounds,
Yeah.
you could be complicating what the child is receiving. So go back, build into your class. At the beginning, you can have more CVC words, more words that are just focusing on those sounds. The games like this, going into the activities, which are all
Hmm.
about vowels, and getting the children to do that. vowel correlation with what I see and what I hear and words that support that. I can't emphasize enough that before we move on, we don't want children confusing too much. And of
Yeah,
course,
and before you go on, Yvonne, just a quick question somebody had about accents. I just want to point out that in Jolly Classroom, under your settings, you can change the accent. So we have a British accent and an American accent that you can change globally. And it is important that you have the correct accent in place because, like you said, Yvonne, there are a difference at the end of the program with the ah and the or. And that's important for words like paw or I can't do the British version, but
before,
yeah, on
yeah,
autumn and autumn, those differences. And so it's important that you choose the correct accent, one, so that they're hearing it correctly, and two, because it's assessed differently just for that one little thing. So do make
yeah.
sure that you've chosen which accent you want.
And of course, we've got that wonderful thing called the schwa, where
Yes.
it's perfect. Your accent is perfect for getting the right sound. I'd say teacher. There's a schwa at the end there, and you say teacher. So,
Yeah, see, I don't even hear the schwa. Like
yeah, yeah, we have the
probably because
schwa. Yeah, and
yeah.
it really resonates with some countries, but children have to recognize that, mirror doesn't
Mm,
end in a ah, it ends in a mirror.
mirror.
And
Yeah.
there are some things that we can't change, like we don't say women, we do say women in most
Hmm.
every accent. So there is that accommodation, but these are rules that children learn
Mm,
later on. But this is
hmm
a rule where children learn about how a short vowel goes with double, some letters that double up, and
hmm
they are consonants. And so we run through this where it can be called the floss rule, it can be just double
hmm
letters. It depends on what you're focusing on. But what we can see here is we've got some really good examples of how children are here. We don't say it, do we? We say rabbit.
mm
And if
hmm
you're arm blending, a little trick that I can tell you is if you have the word, let's say I'll go for buzz. I've got my one finger, there's my b, there's my ah, and I'll use two fingers for the double Z because it's not it's buzz. So two fingers, one tap. So the children can understand that there's two letters but making one sound. This
mm
sometimes really resonates with children how they get over this because yeah, we do write rabbit, but we don't
hmm
say it, and we are not splitting them into syllables. This is something I must emphasize that some teachers have
mm
said that they are breaking the words up like toffee. That's not right. That comes much
mm
later on. That skill comes much later on when the children know this rule, because otherwise it's having syllabication right now is not right. We want the children to understand that there's two letters making one sound. So be mindful of that.
Also, you wouldn't always split it in the right place. Like take the word puppet. You don't want to say pop pet.
Mm,
I would say it more pa pet.
yeah. So
Is that
be
not right?
careful
So the double P is
introducing
at the end.
syllables in too early. Let's
Yeah,
get
normally the doubles are just one sound, right? So they
yes.
just go at the beginning or the end. You don't split them and they do two
Not yet,
jobs.
not yet. That's a skill they move on to when we have Jolly Literacy. But we want to
Mm,
make sure that children are really secure in knowing that I can read that there's two G's in egg, but it's not egg, gaga, it's egg.
hmm
It's also for pronunciation as well. So,
hmm
there's always something we're learning to support something else. And we have a beautiful little activity that the children are doing here where they get the opportunity to listen to the vocabulary that matches the illustration. So that's great for English as a second language. And also we have the lozenge, which is a slightly different shape from just one letter. So the children are encouraged to listen like tennis, tennis.
mm
Get them up, get them scribing, help them, and do the arm blending or a way that children can work out that there's two letters making one sound. We need to have this because if we look at a lot of things in English, we have double consonant. English is not easy. A lot of double consonants that are only one sound. It's not easy at all. An umbrella, well, oof. But if you do feel that this is something you need to have more information on, you can see there the teacher's book is focusing on that. It'll give you tips to get started, your warm up, your core, and also additional activities. And a lot of these additional activities are really great for children who might be struggling and just need a little bit more connection with the activity. But what I would say is the paces of your teaching in class, it varies from one class to another, one school to another. And there are some concepts the children get really well and really quickly. And there's ones that they just struggle on that. But it's repetition, children seeing and also interacting with the knowledge they are receiving. We don't want it to just be a passive journey with phonics. We want them using that information, don't we, Jen?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And it is important, as I mentioned, about having the long vowels in place. And here we are coming, and the children will need to revise the short vowels. And then we're moving on to the vowel digraphs that they have learned in the 42 sounds. So before I would start this, I would revise these things. I would even have on the board, some words, and I'd take the vowels and give them a different color. This becomes quite a multisensory way to look at the short vowels, using a red color or a blue or anything to make them stand out. Children recognize the patterns in these words. And generally, we would say that the A sound always has letters around it. The E can be at the end of the word, that long E. And IE, again, we're showing how these patterns come together. This is really important because when we talk about, long vowels of the hop over E or magic E, children need to have all of this information secure to have this new concept again. And
hmm
because the vowels are magic, they're hopping over. And there are
hmm
some great videos that you can watch. And I always endorse the Magic E song on YouTube. I wish it was ours, but it's a great way for children to understand that cap becomes cape, pin becomes pine, hop becomes hope. I'm using this as an example because they need to see how that E going on the end changes everything. And here you can see you have the lovely little graphic at the top there showing the hop over. But if we
hmm
think about that, there's lots of activities to reinforce that. And this is something that I'd get the children to really spend a bit of time on, wouldn't you, Jen? It's a big step, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. And it's one that a lot of people have mentioned when they go into the hop over E. It does get a little confusing. And I think what you said about making the connection between the word mad and made, I think is so important. You make that connection. And I always think of it like the E makes the other vowel say its name. For me,
Yeah.
that's how I always remember it. So
Yeah.
if you're reading it, you see the E and you go, oh, like it's magical. It makes it say its name. So that, of course, I have to know the names. That's the only
Yeah.
problem with that. But if they do understand, and even if they're not quite sure, they just need to get in the habit of thinking there's two ways to say that sound, that or a, and then
Yeah.
which is the right one.
I mean, it generally, once children, you can even get them to do it physically, holding up the flashcards. And I found that this works very well, where you have children holding up, cat, and then there's an E popped on the end. So, children saying cap, and then you pop the K. We often say when two vowels are talking, what is it, two when
Two
two
vowels are
vowels.
walking, the first does the
Yeah.
talking. Yeah.
And also, it's a great way for children to understand this rule before we move on to more complex ones when we move further along, which we always
hmm
is the case, isn't it? And
hmm
then as children are moving on, you think, how can they ever move on to a trigraph? How are they ever going to do it? They're so young, they're so little. But look at this. We have the digraph here where we have the E sound and the I. Oh gosh, look at this. We've got tie and shy. Oh, and remember I mentioned earlier that it was
hmm
really important to make sure we have that E sound like in yummy, because a bit later on we'd be introducing it as an I sound. So
hmm
again, you have lots of opportunities on Jolly Classroom to be able to interact. Now, at this point, even you can see that the lessons that you are having each day using Jolly Classroom or the Pupils Book is really always going on that learning spiral where we're going back to that original teaching point and then we're expanding and we're expanding and we're expanding. And at this point, children should be reading, they should be using the decodable readers to put all that information in practice. It can't just stop with an activity page and Jolly Classroom. We need them to be reading aloud, finger tracking. We need them to build up their fluency and understanding how all of these go together in a word. They need to be exposed to this. And if we're using decodable readers, they can revise the tricky words. If the books are going home, there's a focus for parents and they can help, but also building up that understanding of punctuation, letter sounds, and how a sentence is formed. It's critical, isn't it, Jen?
Yeah, it is, really is.
And then when we move on, you can see now that we're asking children to do a little bit more independently. We're discussing the picture, we're asking children to talk about what's happened. Before we were modeling it more and pushing the children to come forward with, now it should be a better flow. They know what is in the lesson. They are expecting that they will do something, but what are you expecting from the children? If you're doing the guided writing, at this point, how much are you expecting them to do by themselves or as a group, or are you modeling? How much is that is happening? And also about talking about the picture, we're still using that as our principal way of generating ideas. You may have children who have poor linguistic skills, being able to talk about it, but they may write about it. Isn't that funny, Jen, how we often have that child who can talk a lot and can't write, or the other one who writes
Hmm.
and doesn't
Hmm.
talk? It's that mixture, isn't it?
Hmm. Yeah, and I think also that's why in our program, the assessments, we are assessing two very different skills. We're assessing their reading abilities and separately their writing abilities, because you will sometimes find that a child is much stronger in one area and not the other. And a lot of other programs are only assessing one thing, the reading part. So I think that's one area that we're really addressing reading and writing as separate skills, and it's being reinforced throughout the program. And we're assessing it like that as well, so that we can see what are our strengths and weaknesses. And so then, therefore, what can we do to help that child?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting concept that we are giving the children all these things to take on, and we're expecting them to do it effortlessly, which they can do if you follow the program correctly. But also, if we don't assess and we don't measure how far they've got, we're going to have gaps further on, and we don't want
Mm-hmm.
children to have gaps when they get into
Mm-hmm.
year 2 or 3 onwards
Mm-hmm.
because we didn't slow down and help them. And at the back of book 2, we have some revision. And this revision is a great way for the children to consolidate their knowledge. They can do some of this independently, but also what we do see is it's a little bit of fun. And you can see it's unit by unit. So I used to use these with the fast finishers. If I had children who
Mm-hmm.
I knew would be finished, I'd direct them to go to their section at the back because they can be quite disruptive in a class, can't they, fast finishers?
Mm-hmm.
So they
Yeah.
need to have some direction of what to do silently. When I'm finished, I'll go to the back, find that unit, and I'll do my little activity there.
I
And
suppose this could also be valuable for if they're not a fast finisher, but they need extra support. This could be done during an intervention, or it could be taken home for work at home if they have the time, you know. So you've got the flexibility of using it in different ways.
yeah, I mean, again, it depends on how much time you have in the classroom.
Yeah.
The most
Yeah.
valuable thing is even something you can take these words. And as you can see here, if I was doing the hop over E, look at that on the back. I've got it all there
Yeah.
for me if I
It's
want to do
great.
it in my class before I go on to doing any consolidation. But
Yeah.
think about before you move on to step 3. I've only just dipped into the book to show you how we're
Hmm.
moving on with such interesting concepts that children are beginning to make sense of. They're beginning to learn that mummy and daddy has a different ending. They're beginning to learn that sky and fly has a y at the end, but it's come up as an I. They're also learning about doubling consonants and having a short vowel. all of these things that you, with your mastery level of English, just take for granted, but someone must have taught you. And in teaching you, you've remembered those rules all the way through into adulthood. You can read them, you can write them, and that's what we want with the children. So, the most key thing that I would say is you can have children achieving all of this if you are making sure they know what came before. It's easy to move forward, but if you don't go backwards to check, do they know their short vowels? Do they know their letter shapes? Do they know their capital letters? And you're making that assumption. I can't highlight enough about doing the assessments because there's nothing worse than a child in a classroom having fear and panic because they don't know something, because time wasn't spent on getting them there. And that's awful, isn't it? If we think about a
Hmm.
child in that situation, Jen.
Yeah, and also if you notice a child struggling in a way that doesn't, it's not addressed in the assessment, for example, they're struggling to do formation, right? That can be done as an observation in Jolly Classroom. So you can record that as an observation and then create an intervention to support that child with that thing. And then you can be checking back in and updating the observation to say that they're making progress or whatever. So you can do anecdotal as sort of assessments too that can be recorded as observations.
Yeah, and all this builds up that profile of a child who may be struggling. However, they may be struggling on one teaching point, and once they've got that, they can move on effortlessly. And I've put on here, don't skip parts. I mean, we have mentioned if you've got the handwriting sorted out and everything, but don't jump from, the lesson plans for one section to the next section because you think, oh, they know that. There's always something that we're revising or introducing to
Mhm.
consolidate previous learning. And also your knowledge. It's really important you know what these steps are asking the children to do so that you are prepared and making sure you're building in everything, the revision beforehand adequately before you move on. So just like with the y and the e, what words can I use? Do I need to look at the teacher's book? Do I need to look at the teaching notes coming down? All of these things are there to support you in every way we can. And extension activities, as we said, on Jolly Classroom on the right-hand side, we have all these activities, don't we, Jen?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they go under. One thing I would say though, when I went to visit a school, is that they were in step one and they were jumping on to step two and step three. And it was like, no, they've got things embedded in those that they haven't done yet. Keep to your steps for the revision, of the stories or the activities of the games before you move on. Don't go over to other areas. But, we've done a lot in this session about what is in step two. And I think the main takeaway is that step one has a very holistic, multi-sensory feel to it, in that we're bringing children to that teaching point using lots of different ways. We've established that, and you know that. So when we move on to step two, you still bring that to the lesson, but the lesson now has got more in it. So think about how you are continuing your multi-sensory style, and you can still do the songs, you can still do, but you'll find that children rely more on the actions, palm writing. They should be writing, but you might need to do air letters, getting them to do body blending, some games. They're still young children and they still need a little fun, don't they, Jen?
Yeah, and I think earlier you mentioned quite a few different ideas of ways to approach the learning. And, you made the comment that there's a lot there, right? And people might feel overwhelmed. And I think the key takeaway is that we're not suggesting that you do all those ideas every lesson. It's switching it up. So one day you can be doing this kind of thing, and another day you can be doing something else, so that you're keeping it fresh, keeping it interesting, and the whole time you're just reinforcing things in different ways.
Yeah. So as we come to the end of the webinar, we've tried to pack in a lot and we thank you very much for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you with step three. And that'll be quite interesting because there's a lot going on in step three, which is, great fun for the kids and also some reading, writing, guided writing. We're really going to be looking at how we can extend the program out so they're ready for that transition onto Jolly Literacy. So thank you for joining us. And Jen, thank you as always for supporting me. That's just great.
It's always a pleasure. I love it.
And we'll see you in February already. February. Goodness me.
Can't believe
Oh,
it. Yeah.
dear. All
All
right. Well,
right.
bye for now. And
Bye bye.
yeah, bye. Bye bye.